Lando Norris is one of the most talented Formula 1 drivers on the current grid. Quick, consistent and dependable, he's quickly forged a reputation as a future world champion. But while there can be no doubt about his on-track capabilities, it's Lando's future at McLaren that has been thrust into the spotlight as he faces a dilemma. Does he stay at McLaren or does he leave? McLaren's difficult start to the season at the Bahrain Grand Prix has only sparked conversation over Lando's future, about whether he should stay at McLaren or whether he should choose to leave. And that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. What are sort of the main reasons why Lando would want to stay at McLaren or why he would want to leave? And should he choose to leave, what are sort of the realistic options he has on the grid to move to a different team? So let's start by looking at the reasons why Lando may feel a change is necessary in his career and he may be better off driving elsewhere. And this starts with poor performance, really. As I mentioned earlier, McLaren had a disastrous Bahrain Grand Prix, the first race of the new season. Both cars struggled for pace in qualifying. Lando only just scraped through to Q1 while his new teammate Oscar Piastri wasn't able to advance to the next stage. Lando ended up qualifying P11, but in the race it was even more of a disaster for McLaren as they just didn't have the pace, and Lando had to pit 6 times due to a problem with the pneumatic valve system. He had to keep topping up the car with air at every pit stop, and Oscar had to retire with gearbox failure after just 14 laps. You've got to remember that this is McLaren's second straight year that he's began the season on the back foot. You remember in 2022, at the dawn of the new technical regulations, McLaren made a slow start to life under the new rules as it found itself fighting at the back of the field at the first race in Bahrain. Gradually it steadily improved, and by round 4 it even secured a podium, Lando finishing in the top 3 at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. But that sort of result seems a long way off right now, given how it performed in Bahrain. And this leads me on to my next point, which is the lack of progress that McLaren has made over the last couple of years in particular. You've got to remember that they finished P5 in the 2022 season, which is a place lower than they finished in the standings the year before, and 2 places lower than they finished in 2020 when they finished 3rd behind Mercedes and Red Bull. Now this was a mini revival for McLaren because it came off the back of some difficult seasons, particularly after the 3 acrimonious years it spent with Honda, which finally ended in 2017. But when it moved to Renault Para for 2018, that only exposed the flaws with their car, and that led to a major restructuring of its management for the following year. So having moved forwards, they're now beginning to go backwards again. They're falling behind the likes of Alpine and now this year Aston Martin. And this obviously is not ideal because ultimately McLaren are trying to prove to Lando that they can fight for world championships as well as victories in the future. And on top of the poor performance and the lack of progress, McLaren has lost one of its most senior figures in Andreas Seidl, its former team principal, who was left to join Sauber as its new CEO. So Seidl joined McLaren in 2019, and this was off the back of his success as team boss of Porsche in the World Endurance Championship. And during his time at McLaren, he proved a hugely influential figure and was highly respected amongst the team. It is worth noting that Andreas did not plan to leave McLaren until 2026, but the recent team principal merry-go-round over the winter break accelerated his departure. This obviously is a huge loss to McLaren, both operationally and in its bid to prove to Lando that it is serious about its long-term ambitions to fight at the front of the grid. And at the end of the day, McLaren can't afford to keep losing key personnel. Lando's career objectives might match theirs at the moment, but that doesn't guarantee results in the short term. So those are just a few of the reasons why I think that Lando may consider leaving McLaren. But now let's look at the opposite end of the scale and consider some of the reasons why Lando actually may feel that McLaren is the best team to be at. The first thing is that Lando obviously enjoys a great relationship with McLaren. Obviously, he joined their young driver program in 2017 after he dominated Formula 3, and that relationship has continued ever since. And obviously, they handed him his Grand Prix debut in 2019, and he has raced for McLaren throughout his 5 seasons now in Formula 1. And not only that, he's obviously their current number 1 driver, obviously taking over that responsibility since Daniel Ricciardo, who was obviously a more senior driver, has left. And now has been replaced with Oscar Piastri, who is a rookie. I think you can see already that Lando really has enjoyed taking on that greater responsibility as team leader, and that this experience will only help him going forward as he continues to develop as a driver. I think that it's also really important to mention of the relationship that Lando enjoys with the McLaren team, not just the senior hierarchy, but the rest of the crew, the mechanics, the engineers. You can see he's really built a great rapport with them. You know, that only comes natural when you've been at a team for the last few years. And you can really see that McLaren love working with Lando. They know just how talented he is. They rate him very highly, and they want to be the team that ultimately gives him a car that's capable of fighting not just for pole positions and victories, but for a world championship on a regular basis. I think the other reason why Lando would consider staying at McLaren, not just until the end of his current contract, but beyond that, is because he's ultimately enhanced his reputation since being at McLaren and has continued to develop as a driver. And this has obviously come in sync with McLaren's mini revival, as I mentioned earlier. And even though McLaren have gone backwards over the last couple of years, Lando has continued to get better and more and become a more rounded driver. You only need to look at Lando's results as proof as to how he's getting better as a Grand Prix driver, as he becomes more rounded and more complete with experience. In 2020, his second season in Formula 1, while McLaren finished P3 in the Constructors' Championship, Lando finished in the top 10 of the drivers' standings with one podium finish. And he would only go on to build on this the year after, as he secured 4 podium finishes, a pole position in Russia, and finished 6th in the drivers' standings. And despite McLaren's downfall in 2022 as it slipped back to P5, Lando still managed to finish 7th in the drivers' standings as best of the rest behind the top 3 teams. I think you have got to give credit to McLaren for the environment that they have built since Lando has been at the team, because I think it has played a massive part in allowing him to thrive and perform over the past few years. So surely this is something that Lando will consider when he's making that decision as to whether he wants to stay at McLaren for further years or decides he wants a new challenge. Speaking of fresh challenge, why do we now look at some of the potential options that Lando will have should he decide to pursue a move elsewhere on the grid? Let's start with Red Bull. Now, Lando has already admitted last year that he held talks with Red Bull over a potential deal midway through the season before he signed the contract extension with McLaren. Even Red Bull boss Christian Horner has admitted that he sat down with Lando to discuss a contract that ultimately did not lead to anything. Both Red Bull drivers are currently contracted until at least the end of 2024, which means that the earliest Lando could drive for the team is 2025. And that second seat alongside Max Verstappen will no doubt be hot property given how Red Bull is performing at the moment. But while Red Bull won both championships last season and their 1-2 finish at the season opener in Bahrain is ominous for them to go on and retain both championships, there is one drawback for Lando to consider, and that of course is that he'll be going up against Max Verstappen. Lando would walk into Red Bull, which is built around Max. It is his team. And on top of that, he would have the unenviable task of trying to beat Max head to head. Now this move could go one of 2 ways. On the one side, it could go well. He could actually fare well against Max head to head. But on the other side, it could go disastrously wrong and his reputation could be left in tatters. Lando could find himself in the position of playing number 2 to Max at Red Bull. And obviously this is something he wouldn't want to abide by, given that obviously, as we speak now, he hasn't even got a Grand Prix victory to his name. But I think that a move to Red Bull is on the cards. I think that going up against Max is something that Lando wouldn't say no to. He obviously believes in himself. He's clearly got the raw talent and the speed. So this move could happen. Another potential option for Lando is Mercedes. And there could be an opening sooner rather than later, with Lewis Hamilton's current contract ending at the end of this season. Now obviously Mercedes has a great track record in the V6 hybrid era, having won 8 consecutive championships from 2014 to 2021, and they obviously won 6 drivers' titles with Lewis in during that time as well. But it is going through a bit of a difficult patch since the start of last year under the new regulations, and the first race of this season suggests it isn't getting any better, as it only finished 5th and 7th. A drawback to Lando joining Mercedes would obviously be with the fact that a lot of people who were part of the Mercedes dynasty have either left or taken a step back. James Vowles, its chief strategist, has now taken up the team principal role at Williams. James Allison, its technical director, has taken a step back. Andy Cowell, who was obviously head of the engine department, left in 2020. Although obviously the plus point is that Toto Wolff is still the CEO and team boss. If Lewis did obviously choose to either retire or move aside, that would obviously open up a seat alongside George Russell, who Lando knows well from his Formula 2 days and enjoys a great relationship with off-track. And I'm sure that Lando would back himself to outperform George in the same car. To be honest, I think talk of this move is pointless, and that's because Lewis Hamilton will not retire, in my opinion, anytime soon. He's made it pretty clear, both in Bahrain and even last year, that he has no plans to walk away from Formula 1 or Mercedes. So instead, why don't we look at a more realistic option for Lando? And this is of course Audi, who will join the Formula 1 grid in 2026 when it takes full control of the Sauber team. Now obviously the Audi project is only in its initial stages, but it is a very exciting one because obviously it's a major manufacturer joining the grid. And obviously Audi will take over from Sauber in 2026, and that is obviously the first year that Lando will not be contracted with a team, as his current McLaren deal ends at the end of 2025. So obviously that could open the door to a possible move. And the chances of this move happening will only be made greater by the fact that Andreas Seidel is heading up the Audi project, who of course Lando worked with closely while at McLaren. Lando is obviously well aware of Andreas' capabilities to run a Grand Prix team, and that will no doubt be a consideration he takes when choosing whether to join the team or not. Signing someone of Lando's calibre would be a major signing for Audi, and I think it would be a great fit as both driver and team have high expectations for the future. Audi is obviously already underway with its preparations for its arrival in 2026, and that is still 3 years away. But of course, the plus point is it's taking over an existing team, and of course it will benefit from the fact that it can use Sauber's facilities, such as its state-of-the-art wind tunnel. All in all, I think that the move would be an appealing proposition for Lando to consider. I think him and Audi would make it a good fit, and I think I've got no doubt that he will be keeping a close eye on the team's trajectory in the next couple of seasons. So that obviously brings me back to my original question, which is, should Lando leave McLaren or should he stay? Well, for me personally, I think he should stay, at least until the end of his current contract in 2025, and then he can analyse his options there and then. But for me, I think the partnership that Lando and McLaren have is a positive one, and it is working well. You can see that Lando really thrives in that environment, and he's continuing to get the most out of the car and himself. I think if he continues to do that, it would only be good for his reputation and status. But after that, I would like to see Lando join Audi in 2026, because I do think it would be a good move for both parties. The project is very exciting. Andreas Seidel is already there heading up the project, and I think unlike Mercedes and Red Bull, Audi would promise Lando #1 status. So those are my thoughts, but I want to hear yours now. Do you think that Lando Norris should leave McLaren, or should he stay? And if you do think he should leave, which team should he go to? Be sure to let me know in the comments section. Make sure you don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It is very much appreciated. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.